You can either complain about Slack or you can do something about it. In this podcast, I'm going to show you details how to create a Slack Symphony. Now, you may not be using Slack at your work. You might be using Discord, Teams, or any other tool out there. However, you can literally replicate whatever tool you're using for the word Slack, and this standard operating procedure that I'm about to show you is going to apply to you. I can almost guarantee it. Now, why are we trying to create a symphony? Well, because the actual title for this podcast was going to be, and it should actually be, the ultimate Slack standard operating procedure for remote teams in the global economy. Now, that's a mouthful, but really what we're going to be going over in this episode is the ultimate standard operating procedure for communications for your remote team in the global economy. Now, I'll walk with you step by step with the ideas, with the framework. So by the end of this podcast, you'll have the actual framework that you can apply today, this week, with your team. I can't believe I'm giving this away for free, but this is part of my programs, part of Productive Profits. I want you to thrive, so please take this and implement it, because we are doing this in my teams and it just works. So the first thing we need to look at when we're looking at communications are a few things. First is your organization chart, and just save that. If you don't have it, take out a piece of paper, start drawing an org chart, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second is understanding this basic productive profits principle. This basic principle is around communication. In productive profits, we want to shorten the gap between information and action. Information, it's a triangle. Information is around communication, information, and action. So those are the three sides of the triangle: information, communication, and action. And the key piece is whenever we have communication, if it's from a phone call, from a Zoom call, or from a Slack message, that communication either has actions or information. That information we need to either save to use today or tomorrow, and either take action today or tomorrow. So just remember that trifecta of communication, information, and action, and have that on the side of your desk while we work on your org chart, because we're going to marry both together to really create a Slack symphony. So on your org chart, we do want to focus on a hierarchy here. I don't believe in the theory of flat organizations. Someone has to be an owner. Someone has to be, in charge. Someone has to be a leader, simply because humans are secretly wanting to be led, and we look for those who are owning initiatives and taking actions. Now, when we look at your org chart, let's just say, for example, you're 5 levels deep. You have your founders, you have your executive team, you have your line managers or directors, then you have your team leads, and then you have your team members. So just whatever org chart you have, you're 5 levels deep, 3 levels deep. The 3 level deep might be founder, managers, people who take action at the very bottom. And the people who take action are your technicians, those who are actually plugging and pulling the levers within the organization. Now, why do we care about an org chart? Well, I want you to see this visually, hierarchically, because we're going to be talking in 2 dimensions. And since you can't see me face to face right now, you're listening to me, I want to help you see this on a piece of paper. So with the org chart, you'll be seeing that it's a top-down direction between, a few people at the top who manage more people in the middle, who manage more people at the bottom, who are actually implementing and actually doing all the day-to-day labor within their teams. This is important because this is how communication flows within organizations. It flows either vertically or horizontally. So I'll repeat that again. Communication in your organization flows vertically, top down, down up, or horizontally, left, right, left. Okay? Now, when we do this, we want to start mimicking and creating different pods. Let's just call them pods for now. Pods of groups of people who are both vertical and horizontal in that org chart. And what we're going to be doing here on this piece of paper in your org chart, you can actually start listing which kind of pods you're creating and who should be in the future Slack channel. And I'm going to be focusing on Slack because this is the majority of work tools here. If you're using Discord, same thing with channels. If you're using Teams, I think it's called channels. I've never used Teams. If you're using any other tool, well, you can still identify that you can group people together into one communication channel. Now, when you're looking at your organization chart, you want to have both vertical teams and horizontal teams. The vertical teams are top down, where you have your leadership, your managers, and the people implementing within that team. For example's sake, let's go to the 3 productive profits parts of a company. You have your operations, you have your marketing, and you have your product management. So let's just say, for example, those are the only 3 teams you have in your organization. And that just makes life easy. Those are the only 3 departments, the only 3 teams. If you have more, clearly you'll have to create more channels. But let's just keep it simple here. Now, with these 3 teams, your product team, your operations team, and your sales and marketing team, I put sales under marketing, so it's one team. With these 3 teams, now we're going to be looking at the leaders within, again, your operations, marketing, and product team. With these 3 leaders, we want to be looking at both horizontal and vertically. So if we look at vertical, we'll create one channel, one communication channel for your operations team with the leaders that are necessary to be involved in operations, even from your managers or founders. Then we create a marketing and sales channel, either combined or separate. And here you keep the leaders. Again, we're looking at vertical, who is involved in that team. Then finally, same thing for your product team. A product channel for your product team with the leaders, executives, and founders who are necessary to be involved in the product team. Now, again, this is top down. We're looking at, again, the org chart top down, and we're looking at it from the team view. Now, when we look at horizontal, then we want to capture the team leads and put them in their own channel. This is where you can have horizontal communications and cross-team collaborations, which is so essential in the remote world. When you have these horizontal teams, you should include executives and founders or whoever is necessary to support these leaders and managers with their teams. So horizontal does have an aspect of vertical. However, it's extremely important to make sure that you don't include anyone who doesn't need to be in those leadership communication channels. So this is a basic premise of a top, down, left, right hierarchical org chart, where you're now creating different channels or communication pods with the different teams that exist within your organization. So the teams, again, are vertical, and then horizontal channels of communications to encourage team collaboration, cross communication. Now, if you've done this correctly to this point, you should have multiple team channels and then maybe 1 or 2 horizontal team channels, because there's technically only 3 that exist in organizations. The 3 horizontal channels that exist are an all team channel where everyone in your entire company is on. That can get overwhelming. This is where, it can get really crazy, but let's not go to like the super detailed nitty-gritty yet. That's the first channel that you have. The second one is between leaders and executives. And then the third is between the second or third line of leadership and management that communicate with each other. So these horizontal teams are essential to make sure that we have cross communications. They also are the first to know with strategy and making sure that we work collaboratively. And they also allow for cross communications with leaders or founders or executive teams to making sure that we know what our people are doing on boots on the ground. Because we never want leaders to be too far distant in the back. We also don't want leaders too much in the front lines. And I took that from Jocko Willink's book in that analogy. But you want to make sure that you, as a leader, you have a grasp of what's going on, but also not be too far back in an ivory tower. Now that we have these communication teams, it's important to make sure that we set up some ground rules and barriers in regards to why we're actually communicating. So the purpose of these channels are to communicate around specific actions that are important. Now, this is where you really have to leverage your leadership and your strategic planning to make sure that we have a consensus of what we're aiming to achieve in regards of a company, your quarterly goals, your monthly goals, your weekly goals, as well as communicating around Slack to making sure that you're actually communicating progress or you're communicating updates. One of the things that I like to institute are Monday, Wednesday, Friday updates, either on the horizontal team level or on a vertical team level. Typically, Mondays are your just touch base, making sure that the team is good. This is where you either have your one-on-one hourly call with the team, or you can have 15-minute sprint calls throughout the week with the team. But what we want to do with Slack and making sure that we don't overburden the team with calls, because you can just be a Zoom zombie, we want to make sure that we have updates within Slack from key team stakeholders who are either your project managers or your leaders who are updating the team on what's happening, what's coming, and what to expect. That way, the organization starts to have a pulse, a heartbeat, a rhythm, a groove that we're moving towards. And once we have that going, we can just maintain at a steady beat. So again, just to look top down again with your org chart, making sure no matter how many levels deep you are, if you are, let's say 3 levels deep, you'll have 1, 2, and 3 different horizontal teams. 1 for the top level founders, 2 for the mid-level managers, and 3 for the all hands, all team in one horizontal Slack channel. But then if you have 3 departments within your organization, you'll have 3 to 5 different vertical teams. For example, 1 for your operations, 1 for your marketing, 1 for your product, and then you can have others for different teams within those teams. So I know that can sound complicated, but I really want to keep this super simple for when it comes to how do you actually structure Slack to have a very strategic form of communication, because there's so many beautiful things that you can do to avoid unnecessary phone calls and literally cut time in half. Instead of waiting for a call next week to solve a problem, you can solve that problem in the next 15 minutes by having a really structured communication strategy. Now that is the framework. Let's dive into a little bit more nitty gritty when it comes to how do you integrate information, how do you integrate initiatives, and how do you make sure you marry this to your metrics. So going back to the productive profits principle, the trifecta of communication produces information, which produces action. Within Slack, you should be able to save or bookmark or link to your initiatives, your actions, where you're storing your actions, as well as where you're storing your information. Because again, with communication, those 2 things will happen. Information will be transmitted, and it's either going to be lost in the clutter of the infinite scroll, or it's going to be saved and stored for future use, or it's going to be implemented immediately. Now, the same thing with your initiatives, your actions. You could tell someone, hey, do X, Y, and Z, and then they may not get to it because it was saved in Slack. You sent it on Wednesday. Today's, Friday, and they don't even know where to look for it. That's why we want to make sure that we have an existing tool where we're saving information outside of Slack and we're saving action outside of Slack. Those existing tools can be 2 to 3, up to 5, but what we want to be looking at is that with information, you're either saving it in your project management suite, which you can save notes, or you can save actions, or you can save docs, or you can use Google Docs. And again, these are just tools of the trade. You can use them, use something else. You can use Notion. I'm just keeping it simple. When you have information to save, you want to save it in some place where it's accessible to the entire team and that the entire team knows where it's at, and making sure that we clearly and cleanly organize that information. The same thing with your actions. Now, you can be using a project management software. There's plenty out there. There's no one way. There's no right way. But what I do care about is if you have actions or initiatives that are planned out, or new actions that happen from communications, for them to be saved in your project management software so that you can understand to follow up with those and tag people there, and make sure that we actually have an owner for each action, a deadline for each action, and clear directions of what needs to happen so that we understand what it means to complete that action. So you can see how Slack is not just the one-end solution, but with Slack, we can create the symphony of collaboration, of moving faster, of cutting through the noise and making sure that we focus what is the heart of the matter, what are our initiatives, how do we tie those together with saving this information, with saving it within our action system, if it's your project management software or whatever you're using as a team, and making sure that we measure progress. And this is the final piece that's the most important, and this is the heartbeat of the company. What are the actual metrics that matter to your company? When you focus on those metrics, you understand what are the actual conversion points, what are the actual KPIs that matter to us as a company, as a whole, the bottom line. These are the top level KPIs. When you understand those and you focus on those, you can create initiatives to really improve each conversion point with their sub KPIs and save those in a strategy and create new initiatives based on those strategies. And what your communications are then around, you're communicating around the actual strategies and the actions that you're taking day in, day out to meet the short-term, long-term, and mid-term initiatives to meet your goals. And that's technically it. I mean, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. When you create the framework of communication, using your org chart, just leveraging that, And when you're tying your communications to an actual strategy based on real numbers for your business and your team, things just become easy. And if you want to have your one-on-one chats and just, have fun here and there, great. But make sure that you don't do that at the disposal of the team and you don't go rogue in regards to creating all these random channels that don't even matter to anyone. And when we do that, we also have to have the discipline as leaders to make sure that we know what we allow in our communications teams and what we don't allow in our communications team. And that is a leadership piece. So I hope that this podcast was helpful. We can synthesize this into a shorter episode, so like 15 minutes long so far. But the whole goal really, if we were to synthesize this, let's say into 2 minutes, leverage your org chart, identify the teams of communications that are essential vertically and horizontally. Make sure that all the communications are around your actual actions that you're taking as a company that support your top level initiatives, that support your company strategy, that are based on real numbers. And when you do that, trust me, it doesn't matter what size your team is, every department has different sizes. 20 people, it could be 5 people, it could just be you. But when you do this correctly, from my experience working in over 12 time zones, I stopped counting at 12 with different people all over the world, different times, it was all remote. This works. This is Raul Hernandez. It's an honor to be part of your journey. Do good work.